So Essence is a standard, and you can use Essence on your own. You can go and write practices any way you like. You can use Word and PowerPoint, and you can use physical cards. You can download cards from the IGI website and use them. But to get the best value from Essence, it helps to have some tooling. And I want to talk you through TeamSpace, which is the way that I would definitely recommend you start to use Essence because it makes it easier for you. Now, as you'll probably gather, there's a lot of different aspects to Essence. So I'm going to try and show you a few ways in which TeamSpace helps you understand Essence and how it can unlock some of those benefits that we've been talking about. So we're going to start by looking at the practices. So here we have a concept of a number of different collections or ecosystems of practices. So I'm going to go into the essential practices. Now imagine I was an organization and I decided that of all the practices that are out there, this is the set that I'd like to offer to my teams to use. Maybe this is the set that I've got experience with. I might have communities of practice around them. Maybe there's some assets like templates and things like that. And this is a good place for teams to start. And maybe I've got some things in here that are essential to my company and maybe not. But the idea here is I'm in a team. I want to start with, for example, Scrum and user stories, and maybe that's all. And because I want to use the checklists, in essence, I'll pick the Scrum Essentials checklist. So I've got these 3 practices, and for each of them, I can read what they say. I'm going to create what we call a team room. Now, in essence, a team room is where my team lives. It's my home for my team and my practices. And I can see at the bottom, I've got my practices here. I've got Scrum, I've got user story, I've got Scrum checklists. Now, you might notice on the right-hand side, this is changing. So if I click on the Scrum practice, I see this appear on the right. And for those of you that understand Scrum, you'll see that this is all the different bits and pieces that are inside Scrum. We've got our activities, backlog refinement, daily Scrum, etc. We've got our alphas, which are the things that we track progress of in Scrum. So a backlog item, like that. I can go back with the browser if I want. My sprint goal. And I've got the work products, the things that get created, definition of done, the increment itself. I've got some patterns, including my principles, adaptation, transparency, inspection. I've got roles, which are my accountabilities in Scrum. And I've got the values down here as well. Plus, I've got some competency levels that are required to have in my team if I want to have a success with Scrum. So you can see already I've got a nice little reference to Scrum here. What's this bit in the middle though? This is what we call a game board. Now this is a blank game board. I can create a new game board. I can upload game boards from file. If I click on new, I can choose from a range of templates. Now I'm doing Scrum, so maybe I'll pick mine's Prove My Scrum template, see what that is. So once this loads, that's going to be a template on a canvas that is something that somebody else has created that I can now use. This works just as many other canvassing tools do, where I've got a board, I can click, I'm using a mouse, click and drag. I can look at the full template. I can use the mouse wheel to zoom in. And I can add things to my canvas. This menu down here on the left allows me to add things. If I want to add, for example, a circle, I can add a circle. I can change its color if I want. And I can add various other things like images and icons. But for now, I'll just delete that with that little menu item. I've got a template and I want to do something with it. Now, one of the best things Essence gives us is an insight into how we work. And there's lots of different ways that we do that. And this is a way of having a serious game. So this is a serious game around improving Scrum. And this is the really standard game. It allows us to really look at any practice. We've optimized it for Scrum right now, but it's effectively a blank page. I've got a bit of a clue here. There's this iteration wheel from Scrum at Scale, and I've got my my elements of Scrum here. So I've arranged them here. So what have I done? I've taken Scrum here. I've dragged that onto the board. I can change how it looks a little bit. I like it when it looks like this token, and that'll give me this menu back. So I can click on this, find all the bits of Scrum, and I can drag them onto my board. So that's what we've done with this template. We've dragged all the bits of Scrum on, and that lets us play our first game. And this is a game called Map My Scrum. It's a really powerful game for teams. Now, we all know how Scrum works. You can go and look up the books, you can look at the Scrum guide, you can find any number of videos on YouTube. The problem with that is watching a video on YouTube to tell you how Scrum works isn't very often a good way to understand about Scrum. What's far better is if you work it out for yourself. Even better if you can work it out for yourself with some clues for what the right answer is. And that's what we do with this game. So in a team, we would probably take it in turns. Pick a part of Scrum. Let's start with, let's say, for example, sprint planning. And I'm going to build a picture with all those bits of Scrum. So the object of this game is to take all those bits of Scrum and put them onto the picture in a way that makes sense and that makes it easy for me to explain to my colleagues, this is what Scrum is and how it works. So I start with sprint planning and I say, okay, well, maybe I'll put that. I know that's something that happens near the beginning, so let's put it at the beginning. The next player comes along and they say, what am I going to pick? So I could pick something at random. I might say, well, I'll pick these Scrum pillars. And I'll say the Scrum pillars of transparency, adaptation, and inspection. Now, these are hard to see in the screen. I appreciate that. But if I click on them, I can see them on the right-hand side. So I can use that to navigate the board. Alternatively, my next player could have said, well, I think I'd like to pick something that's related to sprint planning. So what's related to sprint planning? Let's look at sprint planning and see what it tells us. So it's got a description here. We collaboratively plan the work. It's also got this thing here before starting, backlog items ordered. So that must mean I've got to have a product backlog before I start my sprint planning. So let's go and find the product backlog. So we find that either by finding it over here on the left, and it's one of the things we work with, it's this one here. Or I could click on this and I could say, well, if I click on this, that'll take me to the backlog and I can drag onto my board from here as well. Or I could click on Scrum and I could find the backlog somewhere in here and it's there. So I'll drag it on from here. So I've got an idea on the left-hand side of what I've played with and what I've not. So what I've done here is I've used the sprint planning token. I've used the relationships that sprint planning has with other Scrum elements to tell me that I've got to have a product backlog here before I start my sprint planning. So what I might do is just put a little arrow here and say, put that there, and maybe I'll get a text box and say, must exist before starting planning. So I can put a little note here. And then the next person picks the next token. Now this game takes typically 40 minutes to an hour. But what we end up with is a game where everybody in the team has collaborated. They've all placed a token. Some of them have just taken one from the side. Some have used this to then build up all the others. So I can see, for example, I also need a sprint to be inspected. So if this is the sprint planning is not the first sprint planning, I've got to finish the one before. I've got to have a definition of done. After my planning, I achieve my sprint is planned, my goal's committed. So I can add all these on, and actually with the goal committed, I can take that bit on and I can say my product goal is in the state of committed. So I can put these on like this. I'll show you an example of a completed one in a second. But the important thing to remember with this game, and this is a really good example of how many serious games in Essence and TeamSpace work, is that the benefit of playing this game over just reading the Scrum guide or watching a video or having a poster on the wall is that the detail of how Scrum works and how it fits together and the relationships between things much more strongly get embedded into your team. So this is a really effective teaching and learning game. and yet it's so very simple. I take a practice, I take all the bits of it onto a board, and I arrange them in a picture. And I do that in a game collaboratively with my team where everybody's focused and everybody's engaged. So I'll show you an example of how that looks. And in doing so, I'll show you some of the other features of TeamSpace. So this is my Scrum team room. I created at the beginning, called it a default name. So I'll call this Simon's team room. I'll call it Simon's Scrum team room. I've got more than one team room, as you might imagine. So if I go to my homepage, I can see the recent boards that I've been working on. I can see the practices I can choose between, and I can see the recent team rooms that I've been working in. So I've got a team room here called Castle Team Room, and the Castle team, they've done this game before. So this is their version of that Scrum overview. So you can see they've done things slightly differently. So they've put sprint planning a bit further along the board. But what they've done is they've added onto the board a lot more detail. So they've said sprint planning results in a sprint. And in my planning, here's some checklists that I might want to be interested in. So sprint planning results in my, so remember we said sprint planning results in the product goal committed, possibly. It results in my sprint to be planned. So that's this card. It results in my backlog to have an actionable plan in place and the sprint goal to be committed. So what I can do is I can start putting things on the board here that help me in my sprint planning. So here I want my sprint to be planned, so I should be doing all these things. Is my team aligned? Yes, they are. Is the backlog laying out the work? Yes, it is, etc. And you can see that I'm starting to track the progress. So if I wanted to track this sprint, I could use these checklists to do so. In this case, what I'm really doing is using the card as a reminder. So when I do my planning, I don't forget about these things. Then I've got what it means for my sprint goal to be identified. And actually, in my sprint planning, I want to get it to committed. But there's not much to say there. It's just that we've said yes. So there's no point in having the card on the board. And I've got an improvement. If I brought improvements in, which I will have if it's not the first sprint planning, then I need to know, for example, I have a plan to enact that improvement, and I know when I'll be complete, how it's going to be achieved. So in this example, we've put a lot more detail on this page. This is a lot more like our, in Kanban terms, the work policy has been made explicit. So this becomes a working, this isn't the result of a game, this is a working document that a team will refer to every time they do sprint planning. And you might even just split this. You could have a separate board with just the sprint planning stuff on it just to make it cleaner. But this becomes a really nice memory jogger, an aid memoir for a team that helps make sure that they do things right. Now, the thing with checklists is sometimes the most obvious things are the things you forget in practice. You know, there's a reason why in a hospital, the checklist includes a check for, have you washed your hands? Have you got PPE on? Is this definitely the right patient? Are you sure that's the right leg? All the obvious things. So it's worth checking the obvious things off. Is this the single objective for the sprint? Because it ought to be. You know, does it provide flexibility in terms of the exact? Have you been really prescriptive in how that goal must be met? In which case, it's not a goal, it's a task. So you've got some really nice, obvious things to include on the board as well. So that's an example of how we can use TeamSpace in real life with a real team to understand how we do either a new practice to learn Scrum, or how do we do it for real? This is my team, my practice. How do we do Scrum? Which bits do we not do? And how do we make sure we're doing it properly? So there's lots more that we could say about TeamSpace, and there'll be lots more examples of how we can take different flows through the tool in further videos.